Thank you very much for the introduction, Jennifer, and honored to be here once again for this Open Source 101 event. Real quick, this event, this session is actually be covering GitHub Actions, and I have got some slides that I'm more than happy to go through, but I wanted to know, where is everybody at with GitHub Actions? Have you used them, heard of them? And also use the chat too as well. And sorry, I literally just ran upstairs, made a tea because I knew I was going to be talking nonstop. But yeah, we got some newbies, which is great. Also, no experience is needed. The only experience that you need would be a GitHub account because that's going to be very hard to use GitHub Actions without a GitHub account. Cool. Never heard of them. Okay, cool. So awesome. So I'm gonna guess this is gonna be leaning towards beginner introduction, but also welcome. Everybody knows B Dougie. I am B Dougie on Twitter. Actually, before I do that, let me drop this link because this is going to be where the hands-on portion of it is going to be. So I'm going to be probably dropping this in the chat a few times. But this is a GitHub repo. Feel free to open this up. Also, apologies. I will the slides. I don't have a link handy. But if you want access to the slides, I can share the slides and a link at the end or the intermission. I'll pull those up in a sec. But as it was introduced, if you have questions about anything, GitHub Actions, automation, DevOps, GitHub, to the extent, I probably won't go like super deep on the GitHub rabbit hole because it's a very expansive project. But if you have questions, definitely use the chat, and I'll go ahead and get started. So GitHub Actions, actually this portion will be called Getting Traction with GitHub Actions. So imagine this is the introduction. But GitHub Actions, you implement a custom logic without creating an app to perform the task you need. So what is that? That's automation. Out of a show of hands, who's ever automated anything? Automated your lights in your room, automated the pizza behind your head, automated the alarm clock. Yes or no? Automation it's a tool set, it's an idea, it's an art form, it's a movement. When you're a developer, there's a lot of opportunity for you to find places that take a lot of time out of your day-to-day and automate those portions of that. And that's really this custom logic piece. That's what GitHub Actions is. A lot of people get stuck on continuous integration as the introduction to automation when it comes to developers, but this is more than just running your tests. So I do want to point that out. Also, shout out to the lab.github.com. If you are at all interested in getting a deep dive after this or during this or whatnot, I realize some of us are working, some of us are in school, some of us have all the day to sort of learn this stuff. But the reason I dropped the link for the GitHub repo in there is because all this content you can actually find in the GitHub repo up to the advanced stuff. So I don't have examples in the GitHub repo with the advanced stuff I'll show. But I think no matter where you are, no matter if you want to just hands-on right now, you'll get something out of this. So lab.github.com it's a learning lab. It's a tool for us to teach GitHub. And it's a tool for boot camps, colleges, onboarding new developers into your team to teach them GitHub. That's what the lab courses are. It's all self-paced learning. So highly recommend if you want to also learn some continuous delivery or deploying stuff to AWS with GitHub Actions, there are courses in there for that as well. So if you're looking for some examples. But the main example of GitHub Actions that most people kind of get attached to is CI. So continuous integration. So continuous integration, if you haven't heard the term, it's the idea of every time I push my stuff, my code to the cloud, something happens. So whether it's my test run, I can actually see if my tests are green or red. I can see if my continuous integration linting is a thing. Linting is like the pattern of being able to make sure white space all matches and make sure you use single quotes or double quotes. Instead of you having those conversations with your team on a daily basis, instead add a linter. Add that as part of your action, your CI workflow, instead of having that conversation over and over again. So Meg, welcome. Turning sunny in Philadelphia. That's amazing. I'm in Florida right now, and it is surely very sunny here. It's kind of hot, to be quite honest. My air conditioning, I'm in the same room as the air conditioning, and it's nonstop today. So one example, and I'll go through a couple examples, and then we'll jump into some hands-on stuff, is automating my Storybook deployment. Now, this might be advanced, this might not be advanced, but Storybook JS is a design system tool for you to be able to get your front-end app into a place where your designer, your front-end developers can see what things look like. So I wrote a blog post on Dev2 called Automating My Storybook Deployment, and it was all around building this thing. So I've got this project called OpenSauce.pizza, and it's a project to find your next open source contribution. Still working on a lot of stuff. I'm looking forward. I'm actually talking to the designer about up-leveling that, and hopefully in the next couple months. But what I'm getting at is I have a design system, and the design system actually gets automatically deployed every time I make changes to anything in my app. So if I made changes to how this component, which is my list component, where all my repos lived, this is just an example code. But if I made changes to how my boxes are rounded, or if I have, styled this to be red or blue or green, it all gets updated in my design system. And the way I do that is through GitHub Actions. It's automated. Every time I push to deploy, it also deploys a second site, which is designed at OpenSauce.pizza. Another example is I use GitHub Actions for Lighthouse. Lighthouse is a tool built by the Google Chrome team, and it's a way for you to figure out performance, accessibility, if you're using cutting edge tool sets, semantic HTML, or if you're using a progressive web app. So if your app works on mobile in all situations. Lighthouse actually gives you a score on how well you're doing with this, with the performance and accessibility and all this stuff I mentioned. And a lot of people, what they do is they take production URLs like, github.com or OpenSauce.pizza, and they go run a Lighthouse score. And then you take that score and you start making notes, opening up issues, creating meetings, Zoom calendar events. But what I like about it is that I can actually open this up at the time I do a pull request. So if I change code unrelated to anything else, and I open a pull request, I can dig at a Lighthouse score in the PR. And I'll show you that in an example later today. But also a reminder, we're gonna have a break in the middle. So I'll go through a lot of the hands-on stuff, and I'll come back and show some of these examples as well if you want to stick around. But yeah, that's an example of you just adding automation of checking your Lighthouse score every time there's a PR, as opposed to you run it manually. Now, it's no one's job to go run the Lighthouse score. It just happens. So I say all that because I work at this company called GitHub. GitHub is a collaboration tool or a platform. If you have access to your keyboard, to say yes or no if you have a GitHub account. If you don't have a GitHub account, go ahead and say no, but also maybe sign up for GitHub, because it would be advantageous for you in this session to have a GitHub account. Cool. My assumption is yes, yes, yes. Ben said why, but I think that meant yes. But yeah, you obviously need to have a yeah. I mean, if you got this far and you're an aspiring developer, you haven't got a GitHub account, congratulations, but you should definitely sign up for one. It's going to be beneficial to your developer career. So GitHub kind of breaks themselves up in these 3 different pillars. It's home for your code in the cloud. So I think most people know GitHub as, I push my code up to github.com and it just works. And I think that's a beautiful situation. But GitHub it's definitely more than that as well. So with github.com, we have the idea of collaboration at scale as well. So one thing that's happened in the last year and a month is everything went remote. So as you start collaborating, you have to figure out how to scale that across the team. So how do you have access to repositories? How do you manage your organization? How do you give the right roles to contributors, collaborators, PMs, designers? Like that all is sort of built in by default with GitHub within our feature set. And then obviously open source too as well, which I say obviously, I'm not even sure if that's obvious, but there's a lot of open source that happens on GitHub. So if you do end up wanting to get involved in open source, maybe that's why you're here at this event today, GitHub is a good place to sort of get your feet wet with that. So I want to focus on a home for the code in the cloud. This is github.com. So if you happen to sign up, cool. So just getting started too as well. That's great. I mean, just getting started is a good place to be here. Like you'll probably soak in a lot of information just from hearing me ramble throughout the day too as well. But github.com is a place where it's a home for your code in the cloud. but it's also home for 56 million developers, 100 plus repositories worldwide. So there's a lot of people leveraging GitHub. And what I love about this is I get to be advocate for GitHub as well. So these are my handles. This is what I look like on the internet. BDougieO on Twitter, BDougie on GitHub, and also on GitHub. So this is actually my GitHub profile. If you are all interested in sort of showcasing your work and like making yourself enticing for future employers or your next employer or your last employer, if you want to make them jealous, we have this thing called a GitHub profile Readme. And this is my profile Readme, powered by GitHub Actions. So it's a MySpace page, and I always fail to get a new screenshot, but for the sake of explanation, let me pull it up live. And whoops, I said live, but I meant BDougie. All right. So this is my MySpace page, and I've actually had this powered by a GitHub action. And the way this works is, actually, I'll show you how it works, is if you wanted to have some sort of custom code on your GitHub profile, you just create a repo with the same name as your name, and then it creates a special little repository right here. But what I'm getting at is it's powered by GitHub Actions, because every time someone opens an issue, it adds their name. I've got a GitHub action that basically adds Sean to my list of developers. So I've got an action that watches for issues, opens up a pull request, it's an automated PR, and then adds Sean to my list of developers. So you can see Sean, oh, there he is. Sean got added here in a couple different places, but that's sort of how this works in a nutshell. And it's powered, and I'll show you the code later. I don't want to detract too much from the slides, but yeah, that is GitHub Actions. GitHub itself, collaboration at scale, it scales through things like GitHub Actions. It's not just GitHub Actions, but GitHub Actions is like a combination of different primitives. So primitives being, primitives are, sorry, I set myself up for the next slide, but I wanted to say primitives. It's primitives being things like the GitHub API, webhooks, authentication. Those are all things that you have to build from scratch. And it's something I built from scratch quite a few times at different employers, not knowing that GitHub was going to eventually provide this to us for free. So I highly recommend, if you're going to integrate with any other platforms, make sure you're not rebuilding stuff that's already existing, like I did. Speaking of building stuff that's already existing, I take a little time to talk about automation in the sense of basketball. So anybody a basketball fan in the chat? Yes, no? I'm going to take a drink. Cool. And if you're not a basketball fan, basketball is kind of like soccer, but you use your hands instead. This is a basketball court. So I've got my basketball on the left, and I've got my hoop on the right, which I'm pointing directly to it. And the point of this is showing full court layups. So in basketball, you have 5 team members. So 5-on-5 basketball. And there was like a phenomenon in the late 90s, early 2000s of the idea of a full court layup in the NBA. And it's when like the one player takes the ball in and doesn't pass to anybody, but then goes and scores a point in the hoop. It kind of defeats the purpose of making a team sport. And this is like the kind of equivalent of like that one person on the team that does all the work. Not because like they're just not a team player. We call them like cowboy coders, folks who just sort of jump in the production environments and start shipping code. It's always better to sort of have a plan and have a goal of what you're trying to accomplish. So I bring up in the sense of basketball, at this point on the court, it's called Area 31. They call it Area 31 because with Hoopernomics, it's like applying statistics at a game of basketball. They found out that 31% of the shots actually are made from this point of the basketball hoop. So and everywhere in the entire court, this is the highest percentage of you getting the ball in the hoop. This is inclusive of all defense and everything else in situations, but it's 31% of those shots. So if you know that, you could optimize your goal or your plan into a play or a basketball play or through automation like GitHub Actions and optimize to get the ball to that point on the hoop. But you leverage the entire team, all the pieces, all the architecture, your authentication, your webhooks, your secrets, all built in to make it sure you can get the ball to that hoop. So if you're just trying to ship stuff to production without faults and without issues, you can automate that portion of workflow through that. So I bring that up because GitHub Actions, it's all about finding out portions of your workflow that are tedious, things that you do all the time, that you do every day, and just automate that. So if you open up issues every day and you have to label them, or you have to close issues, or you have to review pull requests once a day, those are all opportunity for you to automate. So I say all that because I want to switch gears. There is definitely way more slides, but I wanted to take a time for everybody to kind of walk through this using GitHub Actions hands-on. So this requires you to have a GitHub account. As I mentioned, I made a lot of jokes of it because I was being serious, but this repo, you could literally go to this repo on your own. I do hope that you go with it with me, through me, or with me at this time, but this repo is for you. It's free for you to take, clone, fork, or whatnot. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is go to that repo and start with the introduction. So I do have an introduction of GitHub Actions and what they are. Essentially what I just said. And this is a workshop that I've done at All Things Open a couple times in this event, but also All Things Open, where we have a self-paced learning experience of learning GitHub Actions. So the very first step that you need to do is go to part 0 inside the README. So I'm just right here on the intro to the gateway of my project. In part 0, it has some instructions for you to take this command and type it as a comment in this issue. So I'll go ahead and do that. And if anybody has any questions, if that's confusing, you could also open an issue on the same repo that we're in right now. So feel free to open an issue and say, I'm stuck, it's not working, screenshots. That's the beauty of us. Even though I can't hear you, I can't see you, I just see some people talking and saying yes and no. And I'll just go ahead and scroll down. And it looks like Mike has already got the first comment in there too as well. Actually, it's got squashed. Oh, actually, Mike was the first one. So thanks, Mike, for being our first person through the hole. Because what Mike has done is he's activated a GitHub action. So real quick, I'll find Mike. You can see Mike's name. He's the person who triggered this action. I can see Mike is Director of Web Development, MIT Sloan. Excellent. I'm glad you're here. And Mike has triggered an action. I can click through the action tab. So this is a tab that's all accessible through your repositories. You can turn this off. So if you happen to be an enterprise that does not want an action to run, that is something that you'll have to check in your settings. And then the other thing I should probably check is try to figure out why this action did fail. And honestly, I don't know why it failed. I think it actually succeeded. Mike, you'll have to let us know if you got an invite. But I'm going to say it actually sent you this. This is amazing. I definitely did test this last night. Now my question is, okay, so this is what I'm looking for. We've made some UI changes. It used to be up here, but what I'm trying to do is go to my logs. Here I can go to my action logs, click log, and then I can sort of scroll down and see if there's a clear failure. And it looks like it succeeded, no problem, but I don't quite know why it showed me a failure. But with that being said, let's see if we can debug this and see if Mike was indeed invited. And the way I'm going to check that is actually just go into my people section and then search for Mike. And it looks like he did get an invite. So that is a red herring. It looks like the failure is actually because, actually, I don't know why it's failing, to be quite honest. But it's a false failure because Mike does have an invite right here. So, and it looks like he has actually accepted an invite. So folks, if you wanted to see how that works, feel free. I will say that if you do the next sections, they will not work unless you're invited in the org. And I'll talk about that in a sec as well. Excellent. And then also just wanted to point out, you will get an email as well, just to confirming that it did work. So despite it being a failure, assure me, I'll assure you it has succeeded. So cool. Could it be the MIME magic bug? You might know more about this than I do. I wasn't aware of the MIME magic bug. It possibly could be. But good call out. Meg, if you are more than like if you do have the time, if you want to open an issue and link me to that, I'd be happy to go and fix that after the session. But yeah, it seems like a false failure for sure. What was I getting at? Oh, I did want to talk about how that works too as well. So like the first question that usually people are asking is like, how did you get that to work? And I would say it's because I have what we call in the GitHub Actions business, a local action. And what I've done is, maybe Meg already looked at the code, but I have this Ruby file. And in this Ruby file, I'm actually parsing some data from GitHub Actions runners. So the GitHub Action runner gives you some free environment variables for free. You do get a read, and I want to stress this, a read-only token, but you also get access to the event path. So like what triggered the event. The way we were able to see that Mike actually triggered the action was through the event path as well. I'm able to grab the commenter, which is in that event path. It's the user and then their login name. And then I'm able to take that commenter and then invite them. So if you're not familiar with Ruby code, this is kind of like Python. Honestly, kind of looks kind of like ES6 JavaScript, but without semicolons and curly braces. But this is exactly how, you know what? I think this is exit 78. Isn't that failure? Exit if organization is already a member. I think this might be the failure reason because I am failing right here if someone's already part of the org, and it might be checking after someone gets invited. But actually, no, they don't get invited until here. Sorry, I'm debugging live on the air. Can you please tell me again how to search you up on GitHub? Oh, you know, I never actually dropped the link of my profile, but here we go. Hopefully that's what you meant. Cool. Well, what I wanted to point out is that the fact that I just wrote this at a couple lines, well, 30 lines of Ruby code, and this is how I'm sort of powering my GitHub action. I know what my organization is. I know my organization is GitHub Craftwork. I have a specific team that I invite everybody to. It's a team that only has specific access to the repos. So I'm inviting them to that team. And then I'm using OctaKit, which OctaKit, if you've never heard of, it's a SDK for GitHub's API. So if you want to build stuff with GitHub API, OctaKit is the way to do it. And that is the sort of gist of what's going on there. So if you have already invited yourself, you probably, actually, let me just have a double check into the commenting situation. Hopefully it's more than just one person down here. Yep. So our comments, because they're all repeated, we can see that we do have people. GitHub automatically squashes the comments because they're all repetitive. This is actually a support trust and safety feature, because a lot of times people will respond with like +1, which is not very useful. This is like an old school way of you just basically saying thumbs up. But with a +1, if you do that over and over again, GitHub will squash those comments because it's repetitive and it's not very useful for the conversation. And it just tells you there's been similar comments with the same response to as well. So it's FYI. The other cool thing is that if you really wanted to, I've actually set up some GitHub actions based on reactions. So if you wanted to, someone reacted with thumbs up or thumbs down, you could actually do actions based on that. So that's for another session. But with that being said, let's go back to the Readme. The Readme itself, once we sort of do this, there's another step, and I wonder if anybody's done it yet. No one's done it yet. I only really need one person to do this, so whoever wants to be the first person out the gate, the second step will be adding yourself to this file, and it will help explain the next section. So real quick, I'll do this with my account, which is not a part of the org. And I'll tell you why. The reason why I needed to invite you to the org, which you're more than welcome to remove yourself as well after this session. I'm not collecting any data or information on you. I think GitHub also provides GDPR compliance as well, so I don't have access to your email or anything like that. But what I did want to show is my other account, which I'm going to remove from my organization. And I wanted to show you why I wanted to get someone to invite themselves to the org to make this work. So I'm going to go ahead and make a change to this file. Actually, I'm going to make a change to this file using my other account. And if someone else wants to make a change to that file as well, that'd be amazing. If not, I can show you how it works as well. All right, so I'm in the repo. Appreciate the link in the chat. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and invite myself to. Sorry, I'm going to add some text change to then trigger a new action. Actually, it looks like this has already worked. So the one thing I did want to point out, and I appreciate whoever did it. I think we're good on. If you haven't got your PR, that's fine. But the one thing I wanted to show. Oh, you know what? Did you commit yourself stuff to main? I guess I should state I needed you to add a change using a PR. Because it's open source, you shouldn't commit directly to the default branch. It's okay, we're all learning. So basically, if you want to try it again, just open a PR, add another. You don't have to actually add your name. Adding your name is a very constrained requirement, but you could add any words you want, like hello or world or anything like that. And I'll do this. I'll do the same thing in my PR here. So I've got attendee.text. And the way I'm going to do this is second Brian. I'm going to propose a change. And I'm going to create a pull request from my fork. And then I'm going to put it to the main branch. If you have access to the repo, you could do it from a branch inside. That's not a fork. Just keep that in mind because you are invited to the repo. I'm not part of the repo. I haven't invited myself. So I wanted to show the fact that this is going to fail. And the reason this is going to fail is because GitHub Actions has built-in security concerns too as well. So you do not want to have access to forks on a PR to have access to your secret token. So I'd mentioned in passing, GitHub Actions includes authentication as part of it. So anybody who has access to the organization has access to the secrets, read-only secrets to leverage in GitHub Actions. Now, this itself will fail, and we'll watch it fail as well. If it succeeds, then I've got some questions. But the cool thing about this is you do get the logs in an environment. So this is a cloud environment hosted on GitHub's cloud. And it gives us access to be able to do things like manage invites, manage merging PRs. But the reason why I had this as this sort of the first step of this process is because it shows you really quickly a couple different GitHub actions. So I've got a GitHub action that merges, that auto merges PRs. So you can see the biggest reason why this doesn't work is because this GitHub token is not accessible to anybody outside the organization. So if you have a team or a project and you want to make sure that your secrets and the way destructive PRs can work, like you can then create an action to delete all files in the repo, that's not accessible through people through forks. And that's an intentional security feature. And the one thing I wanted to point out is the fact that we do have, let's see if we have any PRs that are merged. So we do have Toton. Toton actually is invited to the org, and his PR did get merged. And this is because when you go into his workflow, which for some reason it looks like it's still building, that may be a bug or something. And I think what it is this always happens when we have a ton of people do something at the same time. This one is actually sort of hanging a bit, despite the fact that it did succeed. So the cool thing is I can cancel this if I wanted to with the cancel button. But I think what it is, it's something in the UI. So apologies on the bugginess of the GitHub action, but I will assure you that this PR did indeed merge, and it failed to merge because it was already merged. And this is actually a bug I noticed last night too as well. Code is hard to maintain. I said the third time I've done this at an All Things Open event. This is probably the sixth time I've given this workshop in person and remote. And it's because the mergeable state was unknown. So it ended up making this hang. But that's besides the fact. Debugging is not something that we came to sort of chat about and learn. So what I'm getting at is there's a GitHub action, and it worked for the most part, and it merged that in. So I wanted to point out real quick, we have a local action. I didn't point out that it was, okay, now I cry. I didn't mean to lie. I didn't mean to laugh at your tears. But it's not a big deal that it did fail. It's just, the problem is I wrote this code, and because I wrote the code, it's known to have failures. I'm known to make bugs. I did want to point out that this local action is running in this environment using some Ruby code in a Docker file. This is not a requirement for GitHub Actions. You can actually run GitHub Actions without a Docker file. It just happened to be I wrote this 2 years ago when that was the only way you could do it. But I'd also want to talk about third-party actions, which, if you didn't see that real quick, I went to this .github folder and I went to workflows. So all of our actions that are consumed from a third party is now including this invite. The invite third-party local actions, they're all included here. And the thing I wanted to point out is that this action folder is the same folder that I have here. So I'm actually pointing to a folder that's directly here in my sort of file tree structure from my repository. Now, for the approve action, so what happens is I approve the action, it adds a label, and then it merges the action. So here I'm approving the action, which basically, if the CI passes, this action that's being leveraged from this repository, HMAR. So this is a little different than just pointing to a local file structure. This is actually pointing to an actual GitHub repo. So thanks to actions in open source, I can have access to all actions on GitHub that are open source. So here I've got Harry, and I said Henry, but Harry is actually a coworker of mine at GitHub. But Harry created this action for auto-approving GitHub pull request. And the way it works is by simply just copying and pasting this code, putting it into my file, into my YAML file, and then it just works. He obviously did a lot of debugging and built this to make it work, just work. But the one thing I want to point out is that I do have multiple actions. So this is an action that I have as running as a step. So real quick, I want to break this down for a sec. This is a name that you could, these are YAML, this is a YAML file. Real quick, did I lose everybody at YAML? Is anybody familiar with YAML? Cool. And I did see that some people used the Q&A feature too as well. Feel free to use the chat. I won't be able to see Q&A off the bat that easily, but Yashil, you wondered why open source 101 Zoom meetings where a lot of mentors use PR. What does that mean? That's a good question. PR stands for pull request, and apologies for assuming and using an acronym, but in pull request, it's an opportunity for you to actually submit your code to my project. So in this case, I created a pull request from NotBDougie. NotBDougie is my second account, but I created a pull request from NotBDougie and to basically just change that simple file. So that's what a pull request is. And you can see where I added my change. I can review it as bdougie on this browser. But hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, so the second thing I wanted to point out too on that same note about pull requests is that GitHub Actions, not only can you name the action, and this is all YAML, you could also run actions on 30 plus events. So when I said that GitHub Actions is built on primitives, we have authentication, you got webhooks, you got secrets, you also have workflow events too as well. So those specific webhooks that are pull requests, issues, releases, every time you push code to the GitHub repo, to a branch. And you can also then take those same workflow events and then break them down onto basically, if I only want this to run on the main branch or my release branch or my feature branch, I can also add another flag here to ship on branches. Within actions, and again, this is running on the GitHub's cloud. So you have the ability to run 20 jobs asynchronous on GitHub Actions. So when I say jobs, inside this YAML group, the way YAML groups is by spacing. So every job is now every top level element under jobs. I only have one job in this action workflow, and it's called build. I can name this whatever I want, but for this sake, I'm naming it build. I could choose an environment to run it on. So I can run on Linux, I can run on Mac, I can run on Windows. I've chosen Linux, Ubuntu, because it kind of just works for a lot of different situations. So YAML ain't markup language. Yet another markup language is the acronym. And the other thing is that inside those jobs, I can have synchronous steps. And I don't actually, off the top of my head, I remember how many steps you can run synchronously, but I think there's a limit in the size of your action. So you can actually run quite a few steps, like in the hundreds for sure, of how many actions you're going to leverage. Now, I've been trying to say the word workflow, and that's really because that's what this is called. It's called a workflow. And a workflow is a combination, a GitHub action workflow is a combination of multiple actions. And this is actually kind of realistic because here I'm using the keyword uses, and I'm using this action, which is Harry's action, which I just showed you, and I'm using it at version 2.0. The other thing is I can have arguments, and with the argument, I'm using the free token I get, which is, reminder, this is read only, and this is also why not BDucky could not use it, because it's only accessible to members of the organization. The second action I'm using is labeling, and this is an action that I created. I didn't create, actually. I forked it, and that's the other beauty of actions, is because they're all open source, they're all accessible and viewable for folks to see. You can see that I actually forked this from another coworker of mine, Avi, and he created an action to basically label a pull request whenever something's been approved. So I'm combining Harry's action, Avi's action, and also even updating Avi's action to use it in my use case as well. So that's my second action. The other thing is I'm requiring how many with the environment variables, which should be an argument actually, but I'll change that in a sec. I'm requiring one approver. So I need to see one person to approve it. So the beauty of this is the GitHub action itself will approve it. So once they approve it, then it applies this GitHub token, and then it applies the label called auto merge. And then finally, I have the last action, the last action hero per se, and it then goes to another repo. And I didn't point this out too as well. With this action, I'm running it on the main branch. This action, I'm running it on the bot branch. And looks like my computer is freezing up a little bit. And also stop me if this is I appreciate the questions that are coming into as well. Stop me if this is, if I've sort of lost you in a certain case. Like I mentioned pull request. I appreciate Yashil for stopping me and asking the question, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows exactly what I'm saying. I'm just going to throw a lot of concepts and a lot of examples at you, just for the hope that one of them stick. That's really the goal for this workshop. So sorry I didn't say that up front, but you will get a lot of examples during the course of this session. So yeah, what I'm getting at is when this label auto merge gets added, it then merges it with the GitHub action. So that's exactly what happened in the case of, I think Mike was the first person out of the gate to get a PR up and running. So that's why, apologies, Mike, if I continue to say your name. Hopefully you've got something to maybe got a blog post or something I could promote for you for being such a great attendee. But Mike was the first person out of the gate. Actually, well, anyway, I can pick on anybody, but this individual had their action get merged, and you can see that live in action. I didn't mean to make that pun, but here we are. Cool. So I'll take a breath to drink some water. I'm curious if anybody wants the Developing Up podcast. Mike, thanks for taking me up on that. I'm actually going to pull this up as well. Oop. developingup.com. I've not heard of this, but you've got one more subscriber from me. I will figure out how to get this in my Apple podcast. I'm an Overcast. Oh, it looks like I'm going to go on a limb and say you're using Simplecast. You're using Simplecast. I use Simplecast for my podcast as well, but this is Mike's time to shine, so I won't recommend my podcast yet. But yeah, I'm going to keep that tab up because Mike has been such a great attendee as well, in just going through the process with me. Cool. So I guess I'm going to assume everybody sort of got the gist of what that is. If not, again, if you wanted to go through this, I verbally said, I don't think I did a great job, but I verbally said everything that's kind of already in the workshop. So when I go to part 0 explanation, this explains everything I said verbally about the different actions and how they work. And it sort of explains it there in written form too as well. I just tended to not really want to go step by step into what I wrote because, I like to add some commentary to it as well. So far, we found out what GitHub Actions were. We made sure everybody had a GitHub account. We also invited some people to the org on their own. So this is a great tool set if you're doing some workshops, some trainings with your team, getting people into the organization, because again, there's a certain limitations on access to credentials that you'll want them in the org if you're doing a workshop, which is why I sort of did this. And then the other thing is that we walked through how to use actions from third parties. We use actions that are local. And the beauty of this is if I went to GitHub Marketplace, you're not only limited to the actions that I forked and shared with you. If you went to the actions tab on GitHub Marketplace, you can see what's the number? 7,767 actions. So you can see there's a great action called, let's see. Oh, variables and Markdown. What a great action. I don't know who made this, but they should definitely get an extra star as well. It's funny, I've never started my own repo. But there you go. That's what you do. That's how you get stars. And this action will come up in the next section too as well. But also real quick, Jennifer, if you could tell me in the chat, what time check, I know we have a break, but I didn't remember if it was 45 minutes in or if it was an hour in. Because I know we're coming up at the 45 minutes. So yeah, we do have a break that should actually be in the next 2 minutes. So I wanted to take a breath because the next section is going to be about setting up some basic actions yourself. I'm curious how many folks are going to stick around with us for after the break, and how many folks are going to drop off. Actually, let's just go ahead and prepare for the break because I hit a stopping point once this new section, which I will ask the question again of how many people are still here for the break. But if you go get water or whatnot or stretch, stand up. This is a good time to ask questions too. Everything's on the table. So if you have a question about GitHub, have a question about actions, have a question about getting your next job, have a question about who's hiring, or if you want to hire me, definitely ask it publicly in the chat. Oh, and I should probably say that the break, I should have opened up the schedule. I think the break is 10 to 15 minutes, but I can go up on the schedule real quick too as well. Break is 15 minutes, so 45 after the hour. So the error was thrown to me because hitting the merge button first and the button. Oh, okay, got it. Okay, I was going crazy. But yeah, user error is a thing, and it happens all the time. Like the thing about having people directly manipulate the branch on main, it happens every time. So I just always forget that. I approach writing code to never touch the main branch ever. So I never make commits there. So in my mind, I'm always like, oh, they're going to open a pull request. They're going to do the thing that they know to do, but not everybody knows to do that. So fair enough. Also, prematurely hitting the merge button. We all get a little excited as well. So fair enough. Cool. Swag, excellent. How does one get them? Swag.github.com. Sorry, not swag, like shop.github.com. That's where everybody gets GitHub swag. Now, if you're lucky enough, you could probably figure out how to get free swag. Unfortunately, I don't know how to get that today. I've given all my coupon codes out for the year. Well, all the ones I had handy. But a better way is, real quick, I'm going to tweet out the slides because I'm going to share some slides in the next section too as well. So, and I pulled up my Twitter. I meant to pull up my Twitter because I was going to write a tweet as well. Wow, that site took a long time. Sorry, and I'm just going to sit here during the break because I literally just took a break before I started this. Huh, that's interesting. I thought I had these slides already up, and I don't, so I need to upload slides now. So cool. And then for those of you who are still sticking around, where's everybody sort of sitting, calling in from? Feel free to drop a city, state, country. I'm quite curious. I am actually currently in Tarpon Springs, Florida for the next week and 2 days, and then I'll be in Oakland, California for the rest of my life. Cool. Durango, Mexico. Nice. Boston, Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan specifically. I don't know where Ann Arbor is in the lakes. Cary, North Carolina. I know Cary, North Carolina. Yeah, it's close to Raleigh, I believe, perhaps. Greece. Nice. Thanks for hanging out with us. Columbia, South Carolina, but not with Todd. Excellent. Okay, 40 minutes west of Detroit is where Ann Arbor is. California, Minneapolis. Got a lot of Midwest folks here today. Poland, thanks for staying up with us, even more so. Chile, nice. You're technically pretty close to my time zone, but also that's the other side of the world, literally. All right. Let me grab these slides and see if I can upload these slides while we're waiting. Excellent. So I also wanted to, I guess I could, this will come up later in conversation, but I've been doing a series, which it was 28 days of GitHub Actions. So it sort of starts with beginning of actions, 28 GitHub Action tips. So I'm going to drop in some links just to be helpful. If you wanted to sort of figure out the basics of actions. Also, if you're not into reading and you rather watch a video, shout out to myself for having the same content but in a YouTube playlist, which I should find here, which is essentially it's 1 to 2 minute videos on some introductory to advanced concepts of GitHub Actions. So encourage y'all to check that out. Always be promoting what would be an ideal GitHub Action Hackathon. It's almost like I've done this before. GitHub Action Hackathon. Announcing the GitHub Action Hackathon on Dev. So we did this, and we had a lot of different examples that came through the Action Hackathon. I want to see if there was the winners. Okay, here we go. So here are some great examples to answer your question of people who won. And so we had one that was GitHub Action to validate GraphQL operations, it's a very specific use case to people who use GraphQL. So that was a great one. You should definitely check that out. More eyes, please. This was actually an action to encourage people to review your PR. It happens to everybody. You open a PR and no one looks at it. And you get up on a call and you beg people to start opening it up and reviewing it. It's a great use case for actions because it just sets a reminder, and actually it auto assigns people to your PR as well too. This one was kind of a joke action, but they went through the what do you call it? They basically built a GitHub action that whenever there's a bug in your code or a failing test, or sorry, no, it's not even a code. It looks like it's the submitting an issue. And I love the fact that they recorded this handheld. It actually does an IoT device that actually sets off an alarm whenever an issue is open. But what would you build today? Would you like to select one as a winner if this hackathon happened today? Now, I think that would be too easy if I just gave you an answer, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. I would say build something that would solve a problem that already exists. So if I wanted something today, what I would want is somebody to create a action that if a PR gets stale, it actually opens up a conference call. Like I'd love to pair program with folks when you get stuck. So I want to be able to have an action to link to another service that I can click and we can jump on a WebRTC call and pair a program together. That's something I haven't seen anybody do. I did see a service that does this called GitDuck, which could be a nice little head start. But you could actually create these little rubber duck sessions inside your code where you can link together your it's like a VS Code in the browser, or what do you call it, a virtual environment. And GitDuck, it's better than Zoom and Google Meet. So it'd be cool to see if you could actually create a GitDuck action that you could just write a command. So ideally, what would be even amazing, I'm now giving you too much information for free. But if I opened up this PR and was like, not be Dougie, he's like the only person who hasn't got his stuff merged. And they could be like, okay, rubber, it could be dot or it could be slash, depends on whatever you want, but just like rubber duck. Or even better, it'd be cool if you could just do an emoji. And if you get enough eyeballs, if you get 2 eyeballs, then it should open up a rubber duck session. So that would be cool. It'd be like add enough emojis, add enough rocket ships to ship it. Like maybe if you don't have enough time to go and comment, or you're on the road and you just have it up on your phone, like be able to say, okay, if you have 5 rocket ships, then that should be enough to ship this to production, which is kind of scary, but it'd be a cool little thing to test out. All right, so we still have 7 minutes. And so hopefully that was helpful. I'm curious, what other people, anybody else have ideas for GitHub Actions? And it doesn't have to be existing things that you know about. Like think about what would you want to automate with your project? Because I think the one thing to point out is the fact that GitHub Actions, we have all these, let's see, events that trigger workflows. So there's a section in the docs that give you a list of all the events that you can trigger on workflows. And I forgot what the number is, but that looks kind of like 20, 30. It's like 30. The last number I was using was 33. I'm not sure if we've added, because I know discussions, has discussions been added? Not yet. We just added the discussions API just recently. So discussions do not trigger actions yet. Also, I mentioned reactions. Reactions don't trigger actions either. It's something I've asked for, but we haven't actually added it. But yeah, if you're looking for actions, we also ran, let me actually drop that in the chat too as well, in case you're interested. We did run the GitHub Hackathon as well, which the goal for this was we wanted to basically have these ideas and people submit them. And the way we ran this action hackathon is from actions. So in the back end, there's a repository that added the action to the project. So let's see, GitHub Hackathon/hackathon. This is a private repo, so I'm not able to share the code, but I could show it to you. All these submissions, these 851 PRs, these are submissions from projects. And the way this works, and unfortunately this project was not valid. Some people did submit projects that weren't GitHub Actions, but we would just add the JSON to our submissions data folder. And that's the way it works. And the way that was powered is by GitHub Actions. So every time we had a submission, we had an action that handled the submission, and it would validate using the pull request. There's a little create pull request action, creates a pull request, and then when that pull request gets opened, it then allows us to review those pull requests with labels. So this is GitHub script. It's actually a GitHub action built by the Actions team. So you can see this is the Actions repo. It allows me to write JavaScript inside of my workflow file, which is pretty nifty. And the way that JavaScript works is if I have this conditional, if I add a label, so github.event.label. So again, the GitHub event path that I had in my Ruby script is also available here in my YAML. So if the label was no code or not an action, then we basically added submission, a comment to the PR, and then we closed the PR and let them know, hey, sorry, submission is not a usable action. And it was really, we automated this because we anticipated a lot of people who would just throw up a random repo and expect us to give them swag based on it. Because the competition was build a GitHub action. The competition wasn't build the best GitHub action. And we emphasized that. So we gave away swag to anybody who submitted a working GitHub action. And it was I think almost 400 people who got swag sent out to them. I would love to do this again, but I think we really, really proved the model, and I'm happy to see the growth of the ecosystem as well because of it. Cool. So we have a couple minutes before we jump back into this session. Y'all who have been asking questions, great questions. Yeah, if anybody who missed the questions, feel free to ask them again if you're interested in the answer. Excellent. And during that time, I was able to share my slides too as well, which I don't remember if there was a tweet. What I like to do is actually I'll take this off screen. I like to search for the tweet of the event and then add my slides to that because it's usually easier to find after the fact. So let's see if I can find that. And then we'll get started in 2 minutes. All right, excellent. All right, so I just tweeted out the slides. I also dropped it in the the I was gonna say Slack, but Zoom chat. So we can move on from that. Also, shout out to Mike's podcast. Everybody subscribe to Developing Up. I actually am looking forward to listening to that. I'm a big podcast head, so I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I will definitely be listening to that later this afternoon or evening at this point. Or at least when I'm finished, it'll be evening. I still got some work to do today. All right, so I had mentioned I've got this hello world, and I also got about 60 slides left. So the first section always takes the longest. It's sort of explaining, doing a lot of sort of hands-on showcasing. You're more than welcome to jump through the rest of the hello world, or we could do it together, or we can go to slides. So I want to know by vote, either say slides if you want to see some more advanced examples of GitHub Actions and use cases, or if you want us to walk through the rest of this workshop and do some hands-on of building some GitHub Actions ourselves. So the way to vote is either slides or repo. So type in slides, type in repo if you want to go through the rest of repo. Cool. So looks like slides are ahead. And now we're tied. Slides pulled ahead again. Now we're tied. All right, slides and tiebreaker. One more person, anybody? Does anybody care? Like, we're literally tied, repo and slides. Repo, both. Okay, so how about we do this? I'll skip part 2 and we'll go straight to part 3, but quickly we'll do part 1, and then we'll go through as much of the slides as we can after we get through part 1, and then a verbal explanation of part 3. Ironically, this is probably the same thing we did last year too as well. I updated a lot of these examples before this session, but the slides are all brand new, which you can get the slides just by following me on Twitter. Plug. Follow me on Twitter, you'll get all that content. Scroll back. All right, so if you're in the repo, there's part 1. Part 1 is called Hello World. Simply, I want you to basically trigger your first action on your own. And the way you're going to do this is by going to the sandbox repository in the link. And you want to then, this is explained in the previous screen, explains to go to Hello World. You can include all branches if you want. That's a new feature. And then you want to call this your name sandbox or test. But whatever you want to call it. It's easier to find it if you name it with something in your name in case you want to transfer this or delete it later. If you don't delete it, I'll probably run a script and delete it for you in a couple weekends from now. I do also want to probably do it I guess I could still see it if you want to make it private, but create it as a public repo and then go from there. So that's pretty much the steps. If you could open up a sandbox repository, and then I'll give you a couple minutes to basically click through that, and then I'll show you exactly what's happening. And what's actually happening is an action will actually start running. And the way I know this is because this little yellow dot. I was going to say orange, but no, it's definitely yellow. So I'll give you 1 to 2 minutes to sort of click through those steps, and then we'll explain that, and we'll move to part 3. So this is simply what it is. It's not too intense. But those who are curious, if you did not know about template repositories, this is a great tool. If you have a team or if you have an organization that you build the same projects over and over again, it's nice to have templates that already have connections to your Cypress test or connections to your deployment platform of choice. Like, you can have all those built in as default templated GitHub Actions. So here we do have an issue template too as well, which we'll get to in the second part, which we're going to skip actually, to be honest. But when you create a template, I was able to create a template with a GitHub action already included. So, sorry, a GitHub workflow already included. And inside that workflow, we have a similar structure. We do have a name for the action workflow. We do have the event that it gets triggered on, and then we do have our jobs. We have one job and one job only, and that's basically just run Hello World. And this is intentional because I wanted to showcase that you could run bash scripts directly in the environment of your choosing. So if this was Mac OS, you could run brew install. If this is Windows, you could do whatever Windows does, because I don't actually write code on Windows. And this, I'm just doing an echo, a nice little bash script of echoing hello world. Actually bash. It's a Unix command to echo, but that's besides the fact. What I did want to point out is that if you went through this process, you should have an initial run of your action. So again, Actions tab up here. This is brand new for GitHub Actions if you haven't seen it before. You can see all your workflows. Our workflow is called the same name we have in the YAML file. It also is pointing to our YAML file here. What's beautiful is like you just have so many ways to click back and forth between the two different ways. Back when I first started using GitHub Actions, when we first shipped it back in 2018, which I didn't mention, it's been around since 2018. We didn't have all this sort of like nice little experiences. Like if you have a YAML file, you can click this button, view runs. So now I can click through, I can see a visualization, which I do want to show off at the end. Really cool ways you can work with the visualization. You can see the workflow run. If we had some other stuff, we could have it below here. But with all that said, we ran a simple hello world. So the next step for this is going to be, we do have some instruction to, well, now I closed the repo by accident by creating it. Here we go. Let's get back in the workshop folder, the file, part 1. So part 1, it asks you to, everything I just showcased, again, this is all in written form as well if you really wanted to go back and remember this tomorrow. But the cool thing about this is you do have the ability to run multi-line scripts by just adding a pipe as well. If you didn't know, if you did above your enter sign, there is a pipe there, shift and /. And the other thing is an explanation of all these different things that I sort of walked through already. But the part 1A, this is what the next step is. And what I'm going to do is just copy this completely and copy and paste it and go into my workflow file. Again, sorry, if I'm skipping steps, it's because I want to go to the slides eventually. So if you did want to read through this, it will explain in more detail. Whoops, actually, I wanted to go here. There we go. Go to my workflow. I can edit in the pencil. You could also clone this locally and edit there too as well. But because this is just copy and paste, I could do that here. I can set an environment variable called Mary, which for me, I'm going to say Brian, and then I'm going to say hello, name. And this environment variable is being set. So if you wanted to set up environment variables, you can as well. We do have the option for you to also create secrets. Some people are not aware of this. I broke one of my rules. I committed directly to the main branch, but it's because we're in a sandbox. I felt like it was okay. But if you weren't aware, you can actually set some environment variables here as well in the secrets. So I just went to the settings all the way to the bottom of the here, secrets, and I could set a new secret. Sorry, we changed this. It always throws me off because we changed the screen a little bit and I'm used to it looking a different way. And I could set name as my favorite name, which is Fulala. That's how I console.log in JavaScript. But now I have an environment variable. So if I wanted to, I could go back and check to see the last thing I just pushed, which was hello, Brian. It gets set. It's using this environment variable called name. But if I wanted to, I could go back into here and use the environment variable I just created, which instead of name, it would be actually, sorry, secrets.name. And this would actually access my repository secrets, which is what I just set. So if I didn't want to set these directly inline, perhaps this is top secret, don't want to set a name. Also, if you want to set a variable from another action job, so perhaps you set the name somewhere else and you want to leverage that name inside your workflow. you could do that as well. So now I have secrets.name. That should now run with no problem. And it should say, hello. That is one thing I forgot to mention. Secrets aren't encrypted, so I cannot actually echo secrets. So instead, it should be an argument. But we won't get into arguments. If you are interested in wanting to know how to do this through arguments, that is something you could actually leverage. And actually, I should add to this example and talk about arguments because it's a good use case to include. But for now, you'll have to wait until I create that video. Also, I wanted to point out, I'm actually creating a course, a GitHub Actions course as well. I'm looking forward to releasing it next month. And it's going to be from all these findings. So as I realize, if you didn't notice, I did this on the fly. So I totally forgot that we encrypted secrets, but it's a good use case to show you that you can't actually know who I was saying hello to. Your secret's safe with me. Man, that was a great pun. I'm guessing you're laughing right now, but if you're not, I will continue to move on. Yeah, so let's go back to part one. Again, as I mentioned, part one I knew was going to take no time to sort of talk through. Again, you could go back here, read through this, and get a better understanding on what I just mentioned. Environment variables. I also want to talk about real quick is the environment variables that are built in to GitHub Actions. So instead of setting your secrets, you can actually run your an environment variable instead, which I could read whoever ran the action. So this is the way I was able to find Mike's name in his first PR. And what I'll do is I'll fix this because this did not work the way I intended. So I'm going to put GitHub actor with $1 I'm going to commit that back to main. I'm going to run this. I'm going to see how fast this runs. Also, feel free to ask questions if you're lost, concerned. If you think I'm doing 2 minutes trickery and magic, I'm happy to sort of reveal behind the curtain as well. All right, so the thing to point out is the GitHub actor is always going to be the person who triggered the action. So this is really good to note because a lot of times you'll need to debug stuff and it might not be clear what commit or what happened because not every action is based on a commit. I can run actions on issue opening. I can run actions on comments on issues, PRs, reactions. Not reactions yet. Hopefully we'll ship that. That would be a great action to run on reaction actions. But I just wanted to point out because bdougie triggered this action, the GitHub actor that I set as variable is bdougie. Cool. So yeah, that kind of concludes this little part here. I made a little joke and a pun about variables in Markdown. I have a GitHub action I wrote and created for this workshop, which essentially does Mad Libs for your issues. So if you wanted to see how actions get triggered on issues, I do encourage you to test this out and try it. But for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over it and go directly to part 3. And part 3 is all about CI. Now, this is usually where people start with GitHub Actions. And I won't actually wait for you to actually, how do you manually run actions? That's a great question. So if you ran an action, so before going to CI, if you wanted to rerun your actions, you could do that here. That's a possibility. But there is a case that you perhaps want to run your actions manually, as in like, there is an action that I've run with this project. So shout out to skyline.github.com. This is the project that we shipped back in January, end of January. We didn't do a lot of marketing around it because it was more of like a sort of like cool feature of GitHub, like a little passion project that we shipped. My team did, and the way this works. Sorry, I just want to give this context because I think it's really cool. The way this works, it actually takes your GitHub handle and it identifies your contribution graph. So these are how many commits I made throughout the year of 2020. This is me basically doing some automation. So that's why this looks like a giant block. But if you want a more like a realistic one, if I go to 2019, here we go. this looks like a, yeah, so this is 2019. This is actually around here is when I had some time off because I had a kid in 2018, the end of 2018. So I took some time off here. This is me ramping up, and this is me starting to really start doing some action work and doing some example work. So that's what that is. But it's a cool little visualization built in WebGL. But I bring that up because I have a repo, and I've got this this repo that runs screenshots. It actually, I'm in the wrong one. Workflows, release. It actually takes screenshots of this site in 3 different browsers. So I think it's Edge, Firefox, and Chrome. And I take screenshots of this because I wanted to see if it works. And this is an example we did for our previous event where I have my GitHub Action running. And at the end of my slides, I actually have this running in a video where you can actually see this running live. But for your question, how do you run this manually? It's this event. You have to actually add this event to Workflow Dispatch to dispatch events manually. And what that does is if I wanted to run my release testing, so I test the release, this is my script, Microsoft Playwright action. I have a script that basically runs Playwright. Actually here, that's where my Playwright script is, and takes those images. And then if I go in my workflow, and this is way more advanced than anything else I'm going to be showing. But if once I add workflow dispatch, it adds this little button to my workflow, and then I can run this on any branch that I have available to me. So probably should zoom out, but check out all these failures. You can tell we've been testing this. But yeah, this is essentially it. So if you wanted to add manual workflows, also shout out to my YouTube channel and my Dev2 post. I do have a whole Dev2 post on how that works. So feel free to run manually run workflows on GitHub Actions. You'll probably find my content. Cool. So let's get out of the hello world. Let me talk through the CI. Now, GitHub Actions, I just showed you a bit of CI stuff in that advance. And I went really quick because I have slides to support that stuff. If you wanted to, we have another template called CI template, and it will encourage you to add a CI. So if you do not have any actions, which we can also change, this is an old screenshot, we changed the UI. If you don't have the actions, it will then appear with this screen. And based on the language that you're using, it essentially lets you set up a workflow just by clicking a couple buttons. So you'll get an option to add either Node packages, Node.js, because the library that you are cloning from the CI template is some JavaScript. So it just assumes JavaScript for you. But if you had a Ruby project, you had a .NET project, or C#, it would then recommend C# for your actions. And then it will add this workflow file to your project. It will look a little different because Node 8 is no longer supported. It's supported with actions, but it's not supported by the community. You want to use a later version of Node, like 14. So I should update these screenshots. But this is the YAML file that you get. Also, when you build actions, you get this like right panel over here that gives you documentation, inline documentation on how to leverage actions, how to write them, how to set up your YAML. So keep in mind, if you do any in-browser action editing, you will get some documentation here too as well, which is part of the reason why I always do editing in browser. But as soon as you add that, you'll get a CI that actually runs a test. And then we go through a couple of different things, examples of adding tests and making those run. We do have a example of running a build. So based on that build, we have a parcel. We run parcel to run the build as well. And then adding linting, which is pretty cool, which again, please go check out this content. Self-paced, check it out later. I did skip up because I wanted to show off this one, which is linting. So a lot of us use Prettier. A lot of us use linters. If you use Go, it's built in by default. But it's be able to take your code and lint it to the point where everybody on the team has the same structure of code. Now, with this GitHub action, the way it works is it takes whatever your linting rules are and then manipulates the code at the time of PR. So someone got through. The one thing I hate about like things like Husky or those pre-commit hooks is that it always blocks you on shipping code. And I don't want my command line to tell me I can't ship my code to GitHub when I'm ready to end my day because I have linting. That's like the worst experience. Like linting because a pre-commit hook tells you to lint when you're just trying to go have dinner or go take a break. So Node Code Formatter basically does that for you at the time of PR. So open up a PR. One thing I loved about when I learned about GitHub like 7-8 years ago is that GitHub, as engineers, we PR early. So you put the PR up, you share it with the team, and you just keep working on it. And a lot of people wait to the PR until you're done. It's better to get your stuff out there and ready for review early because, again, automation, always having people looking at your stuff while you're working on it because there could be somebody who's working on the same thing who could provide feedback. Anyway, what I'm getting at is open up PR, add the node formatter. It actually manipulates your code and adds a commit directly to your PR. Now, I realize it's not okay for every team. You could build it the way you want. You could fork it, create your own. But I love this because as a commit to my PR, my code is now formatted. So I don't have to wait to lint everything locally. It could just be linted whenever I push up to production. Because, everybody's different on the team. Maybe you're new on the team. You don't know single quotes or you're still stuck in double quotes land, whatever it is. And then this actually covered in the slides. But I do recommend check that out. I do have a couple of other options for GitHub Actions that I recommend here in the intermission, which sometimes we go fast enough that actually in person, we tend to go a little faster because I could see people in the eyeballs and stuff like that and where are people at. But this would have been our normal intermission, and I would have walked through a bunch of these examples. And then the other one, this is work in progress, which is continuous delivery as well. Excellent. So I don't know. I think we still have about 20 minutes. I did want to share the final bit of slides and walk through the rest of the example. So I hope everybody who wanted the slides, I put them up on Twitter. Everybody who wants to go through the self-pace, you're more than welcome to. But I wanted to walk through a couple other use cases for GitHub Actions, if you don't mind. So we just briefly looked at CI/CD. Actually, for say yes or no, folks, if you are familiar with CI, continuous integration, it's just new. This is a GIF I love using because it kind of explains CI/CD. This obviously premier athlete has figured out how to get logs into his basement using a treadmill. Like this is the part of automation that I love. Like figuring out how to solve a problem in a way you didn't even think you could even do. Like the thing I was doing with taking screenshots at different browsers using Playwright is something that's built into Playwright, but it's something I've never used. And what's cool about that is my action is usable by anybody else who wants to look at my repo and copy and paste that code for somebody else too as well. This looks like a continuous integration pipeline. I bring this up because most people are familiar with GitHub for source control, but imagine GitHub for building and running your test, for deploying your staging environment, which I'll show at the end, and then deploying to production. This is what we're going to cover. And linting is something I covered briefly, but linting should be something that should just be automated. Like it's not a discussion. It's not a reason to have 10 engineers in a room discussing on how to lint your project. It's a decision that should be made up front and everybody just sort of adheres to because you don't have to think about it. Speaking of which, GitHub.com, we took a stance on jQuery and actually removing it a couple years ago. And the way we did that was through automation. So we took every time you committed jQuery, which jQuery is a JavaScript library to do animations and fun stuff in the browser, it just built on top of the DOM. JavaScript is advanced far enough that a lot of the features you got in jQuery you could do in regular JavaScript. So the engineering team took a decision to say, hey, no more JavaScript, no more jQuery in the GitHub code base. And the way they did this is every time you open a PR that had jQuery in it, it would return as a comment, a code comment, the JavaScript instead. And it'll actually be in line. So the cool thing about GitHub is you can annotate your PRs with comments, and then you could also accept that code through comments as well. So you don't have to clone it locally or anything like that. So if your excuse was, I don't want to write JavaScript because I'm used to jQuery, I'm trying to get this out the door, you don't have an excuse anymore because we give you the JavaScript up front in your PR. It was a wonderful decision that was made. It was a really cool experiment that was also made. So if you're interested, check out that blog post that's right there. It's actually on the engineering blog. I did mention Marketplace as a place to find built solutions. So GitHub Marketplace, 7,000 GitHub Actions out there. Automation as a sense of this guy, Gregor, he maintains OctoKit. He automates up to 25 plus repos. He's a solo maintainer on all those repos. And the way he does it is he actually leverages his GitHub projects as an inbox. And he automates the inbox to the point where whenever something gets merged, it gets moved into the done column. But also, whenever something gets labeled, it gets moved into a labeled column for all those actions. All those issues. So what he does, that uses semantic versioning. He actually built a GitHub application to integrate semantic versioning into his PR. So if you add the feature flag on his PR title, it then adds a comment and then merges that into the main branch, ready for release. He also cuts releases ways as well. I did a whole talk with him on twitch.tv/GitHub. It's also on youtube.com/GitHub. It's in a playlist called Open Source Friday. Me and him talk about his entire experience, so I do highly recommend you check it out. But here you can see the features, you can see the done column, and that's sort of the process. So now this is the point where this would have been the rest of the CI Markdown part 3, but this is going to be broken into a continuous delivery pipeline. So things like what Gregor was doing, creating release notes. What my issue is, like, I don't really remember every time I make a change or make a commit. And when you have to go back and create release notes after the fact, it can be quite painful. So there's a GitHub action called Release Drafter that every time you push to the main branch, you merge in a PR, it adds a commit to the release drafts. And then when you're ready to cut a release, you can. So this is that Skyline project I just showed you. This is, if you didn't know, this is where you can find releases. And then you can see I have a draft release right here. So I made a commit. Actually, Neha made a commit. And then you can see that we have a drafted release. And the way this works is that you have a standard YAML file that actually sets up every time a commit's made, it adheres it to the YAML file. And then what we're doing is we're using labels to filter them. So if it's a maintenance change, if it's a feature change, if it's a bug fix, it gets segmented into those different sections with these emojis. The other thing is this is also on Marketplace, so definitely leverage it. And this is what an actual final solution looks like. So this is my open source project. And this is all my dependabot PRs all organized directly into the maintenance section, because that's exactly what it is. But then I can also look up top and see exactly what features got shipped. So a lot of times I try to do releases with just dependabot PRs. Now I don't have to actually focus on that so much because they're all segmented and separated as well. Now, this is something I couldn't get into because I knew I wasn't having the time. So I have a bunch of videos around this, or they're actually GIFs if you really wanted to know. But cloud deployments, environment management. This is the ability to, if you go into settings and you scroll down to the environment section, this is a section that's been around for a couple of years now, but we haven't really had a use case to use it until GitHub Actions. And it gives you the ability to create separate environments for staging and production, and then power that through GitHub Actions as well. You can also have secrets specifically for the environment. So if you have a database URL that needs to be on staging, you could also include that in your action. You could also have approvers too as well. So at the very end of that real quick, it was adding an approver to approve the, I don't know where my mouse went, but I was going to highlight it. But basically, we're adding an OctoKit Academy dev team to approve the PR, and then also approve the deployment to production as well. And this is what it looks like. So this is my workflow visualizer, which I wasn't able to sort of give you an example in our workshop portion of this conversation, but I'm able to have segmented jobs or workflows. Actually, this is all one workflow, but these are segmented jobs. So I got my deploy staging job, got my smoke test staging, which is my screenshot sharing as well. And they're all dependent on each other, which is why they're sort of architectured into one line. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that we can also attach our URL at the time, and this is all in your action workflow as well. So I mentioned my test case of just basically looking at the, so I'm looking at, yes, Katie's, my coworkers, their contribution graph, and being able to see, okay, this graph works, it's working in this environment on staging. Now I can go through and say, I'm going to go ahead and improve this. So I can hit review, I can approve the deployment, and this is all built on top of GitHub Actions. Now this is, the UI itself is built into GitHub, but it's powered through GitHub Action workflows, and that's how you can turn off and enable this stuff. And this is an example of the action workflow as well. There's a watered down version in the repo of this, so it doesn't include all my Azure credentials or anything like that. But you can see how complicated you can get, where on the line 6, you can see I'm setting a staging environment. I'm actually taking the URL from a previous job, and I'm actually, so the job steps from popular repos, and the output of that, the web app URL, I'm able to take that and apply that to the URL. So I'm able to do all that dynamically as well. Feel free to slow me down if you have any questions. I'm happy to expound, but I'm sort of just trying to whet your appetite on GitHub Actions and what you can sort of possibly do with them. Compressing images for the web. This is something that I have this project, BW Live. It's my main site. It's where I kind of put everything up there. It's like my digital garden. And I do a lot of live streaming, but I have a lot of projects on there that I have examples of screenshots that are not optimized for the web. And I found that this was a performance hit because some things could be like half a gig image and some things could just be, you know, a couple gigabytes. And I wanted to aim closer towards the gigabytes. So I showed briefly, but here you can see in the middle of this, the Caliber app image actions, which is here in the GitHub Marketplace. Don't know why this is so blurry, but the GitHub Marketplace, it's like the first thing that comes up when you search for images and actions. It's great naming on their part. And I've added this so that every time a pull request is open on my project, I'm going to compress those images to something that's more usable for the web browser environment. And you can see I'm checking for any JPEGs, any PNGs, and as well as WebPs. And I'm going to leverage their tooling in their repos to make that work for my use case. So here you can see I've actually compressed these images to the point where I'm getting like 60% reduction of images. And this is all built on this copy and pasting the example in their README for GitHub Actions. So highly encourage you, if you do have images and you want to get your feet wet on GitHub Actions, maybe check out this action. The other thing I wanted to point out too as well is the ability to upload artifacts. Towards the bottom, I mentioned a couple times about me taking screenshots of the different browsers and their images. On the bottom, you can see I do have artifact that I've uploaded to my workflow. So every time that workflow runs, the images get uploaded, and anybody can go in tomorrow morning, the next day, they can go into the action workflow and look at the test and see if they're ready to review it, they can see what it looks like. It's just attaching it directly to the PR and the action. Sorry, I actually highlighted it right here, but there we go. Here's a red box. And the way I'm doing that is I'm leveraging another GitHub action as well, which is upload artifact version 2 at the bottom. That's exactly where my playwright is running. I showed that briefly in the other repo, but this is stuff you could do in actions. These are things that I thought of to improve the situation for this project, but there's a lot of opportunity for you to, you know, embed actions into your workflow. So sort of rounding out the bases real quick, you might not have been wondering, but you have the ability to do self-hosted action runners. So if you wanted to host your stuff on DigitalOcean, in the settings, you could actually choose the environment you're looking to host on, or sorry, the environment that you're looking to run into your own host. So whether it's locally in the box in your bathroom or your kitchen closet, or DigitalOcean, Azure, AWS, whatever your flavor of cloud is, and you could run that yourself using those commands. This is me running those commands. It's getting it running locally. Wait for it. There it is. GitHub Actions running. And then the other thing is you could also take that same concept of getting local runners and run that on Kubernetes too as well. So this is a Kubernetes cluster. All the green boxes are actively running actions on PRs. And this is my coworker, Jonico, who I just showed the repo in the previous slide, which you can grab from the slides after the fact. And he's running this, and he's able to decommission and commission different actions as well. Awesome runners, that's his repo where you can find different flavors of self-hosted runner situations. Probably pretty easy to Google awesome runners or go to GitHub and look at awesome runners as well. And then I already mentioned this, but GitHub script and GitHub hackathons and how that runs using the script and how to merge. I actually, earlier I did explain this verbally without showing the slides and walk through that. So finally, I started with this whole conversation with automating Storybook. This is how I did it. This is the workflow that I'm doing it with. I have conditionals that are checking for my components if they changed. And if they have changed only in those folders, then it's deploying a whole new Storybook using all the commands I would use locally. So reminder, you could run commands, npm commands, any sort of installed environment commands, plugins inside your action runners as well. And then the other thing I mentioned too up top is the Lighthouse Action. Every time I'm at a PR, I get a score. The score is actually embedded inside my action logs. So just like uploading, it also uploads an artifact, which I don't have a screenshot of. But every time I upload those or use those logs, anybody can go and check to see, hey, how did Brian do on this PR? Hey, by the way, progressive web apps is 56. Could you fix that? So that is pretty much it. Of examples, this is my example of my workflow visualizer, which again, I explained earlier. Hopefully I'm only mentioning a couple concepts in case anybody has questions or anything like that. There is a video of continuous delivery in GitHub Actions. So if you are interested in seeing this in action in a different way, in a different light, it's on YouTube. Just search for continuous delivery with GitHub Actions. You'll find it. Reminder, my GitHub profile is powered by GitHub Actions. So go to that repo, look at the Actions Workflow tab or the Actions Workflow folder, and you'll see exactly how that's built with a little bit of Ruby and a lot of actions. Also, reminder, I have a bunch of videos for tips and tricks on GitHub Actions. It's on YouTube. Have at it. There's 28 different tips that you can sort of just sink your teeth into, different flavors of way to approach it. Hope you enjoy. And that kind of summarizes everything that I wanted to share today. I really thank everybody taking that time out of your day. I really encourage you on your journey to open source. It is a journey, and not a destination. So it's a constant thing I think about when I approach my work, when I approach creating repositories and examples for conversations like this. And I do encourage you to, do stuff, share, talk, have conversation. Cool.